What's up, y'all? It's Drewski, and I've teamed up with Mountain Dew to produce a hilarious new basketball podcast called The Dew Zone with Drewski. Learn the backstories of your favorite ballers and celebrities like Jamal Murray, Taylor Rooks, Asia Wilson, and many more. You won't want to miss this. Listen to The Dew Zone with Drewski on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
What's up, guys? We're going to do this podcast. My name is Salman Ali, at Salman Ali NBA on Twitter. Here joined by Adam Spolin at Sports Radio 610. How you doing, man?
I'm good.
So, at this moment in time, the safe bet is that Houston will select Jalen Green with the second overall pick. We've seen multiple reports from pretty credible people like Kevin O'Connor at this point that say he's going. That's where they're leaning. The Vegas odds have Green as the odds-on favorite for the number 2 overall pick. And Green himself is only planning on working out with the Pistons and the Rockets. Now, that last part is obviously posturing by Green's camp, but it is a little bit of an indication of where things stand right now.
Yeah, I agree. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of intel that is linking Evan Mobley or anyone else to the Rockets at this point. It kind of feels like the two guys that are most likely to be Rockets a week from today would be Jalen Green or maybe they swing a trade and wind up with Cade Cunningham. That's kind of the direction that it feels like it's going, but it's still pretty early in the process. And just listening to Rafael Stone talk yesterday, they're certainly not boxing themselves into anything. So they seem to be just keeping their options open with everything, whether it be a trade up, a trade down, trade out of the pick, or just keep the pick at 2. It kind of feels like that all of their options are on the table right now.
Right. And I think Green himself probably has reasonable confidence that he's going to be a top 2 pick. Yeah, and you're right. Stone came out yesterday and insisted that they don't have anything locked in. But at this point, I'd be kind of floored if they don't know already who they're going to draft. We're a week away at this point. They've obviously done their homework by now. I guess my question to you is, if Green is indeed the pick, how do you feel about it?
I don't think it's a pick that misses, to be honest with you. I think that he's a really good prospect. I think he has a really, really high ceiling. And I think that you are coming out of this with a guy who's going to be a future All-Star. I think that's going to be the case. I think that's what they want out of this draft. I think that's what they get out of this draft. So I don't think 1 through 4, I think you're going to wind up with a great player either way. It doesn't matter who you take. There are certain fits that maybe you like better than others, but I think Green's an all-star. I think he's a future all-star. And while that's not the direction that I would go in personally, I don't think that you can go wrong with making that pick.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I personally have 2 tiers in this top 4. I have Cade Cunningham in a tier all himself, and I have Jalen Suggs, Jalen Green, and Evan Mobley in that second tier, with probably Evan Mobley at the top. And when you have guys in a tier like that, it's pretty interchangeable. You can squint and see a case for all those guys at the second overall pick. While I personally think Mobley is the guy, I can understand why anyone would be infatuated by Green. It's not hard to see it, right? The guy's an A+ level athlete, great leaper. Finishing at the rim is good. Scored efficiently at the G League level. Good shooter. His handle is, he's shifty, but it's not that tight yet. He could tighten that up a bit. But again, he's 19 years old. Everybody can tighten up their handle a bit. His pick and roll ability, again, needs to improve. I have questions about the playmaking and I have questions about the defense because the playmaking just isn't as instinctual at this point the way it is with someone like Jalen Suggs, right? Like Jalen Suggs has that already down pat and he seems like a little bit more of a well-rounded prospect because of it and the defense. But I think in terms of scoring ceiling, this guy definitely has one of the highest ceilings in this draft.
Yeah, the transition stuff is pretty special, but you have to be able. I wonder how he's going to handle scoring in the half court or being productive in the half court, especially early on. And teams are going to try and slow you down. And I know the Rockets want to play fast and all that sort of stuff, but you kind of see it against the really good teams. And when the moments get big, the game slows down. And so, can you rely on him to be productive when that's going to happen? I don't worry necessarily about the stuff that he's not good at right now. I kind of focus on the stuff that he's really good at right now, and that's kind of the athleticism, the ability to get to the rim. I think that matters more, and then you just try and smooth out the rest of the edges. But for me, I'll be honest with you. I have Mobley and Cunningham on the same tier, and if I had the first pick, I would seriously contemplate taking Mobley. Just for me, it's the size. And I think that's the one negative with Green. It's not like he's small or anything like that, but he's not like a transcendent, he's 6'5". That's nice to have, but you would like, if you're going to, to build around someone, I think you'd like to build around someone who's got a little bit more size than 6'5". So that to me is the biggest thing. And size is not really anything that he can improve on. James Harden is not the biggest guy in the world, but he's, at least in terms of height, but he's built like a tank. So that kind of covered up for just the, I guess, lack of height in that regard.
Yeah, and what I love about Mobley is he is so versatile and so plug and playable, right? Like you don't have to construct a specific type of team to fit around him. He can fit in a bunch of different team constructs, and that's why he's my number 2 overall pick. I think he has a super duper high ceiling. Defensively, he is really gifted. He moves east to west really well. And that's something I'm not sure. I don't have that same level of confidence with Jalen Green. Obviously, Jalen Green's smaller. He has a 6'7" wingspan, which it's really hard to be a plus defensive player with a 6'7" wingspan. I mean, Drew Holiday is obviously the famous example of a guy who managed to make it work without a very high wingspan. But in general, you need like a 6'9", 6'10" wingspan at the minimum to be like an awesome defensive player. So I think he's probably going to settle in at like a below average territory. Offensively, again, like he instinctually he just doesn't have it yet, and I think he can get to a point where he's a good passer. I don't think just because we don't see any he doesn't have those instincts right now. I don't see a case where he's ever going to become a great passer. I think he'll become like a Devin Booker / Zach LaVine level passer, which averaging 6.5 assists per game is not bad, but it's not James Harden. It's not like carry a team on my back level offense.
And the assist numbers will come just based on the gravity that you have. If I don't think Russell Westbrook is a great passer per se, but he averages a lot of assists just because of how much attention that he actually commands when he's out on the floor and when he has the ball in his hand. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna. I don't want to say anything about some of the negatives just because I haven't seen enough of him. The stuff that you hear though from guys that played him with him in the G League, it's pretty it's impressive, and it's not something that I necessarily expected to hear. You hear the guy, he goes and he takes the money. You don't necessarily think that you kind of tend to think the worst of them, I guess would be the best way to put it, as opposed to the guys who go to college. I don't know if that makes any sense, but my expectations weren't all that high, but just reading about him, it's been very impressive. I think that that sort of stuff I think I'm pretty high on. I think I'm higher on him than you are, it sounds like. But yeah, I would still go Mobley.
Yeah, here's what I'll say. If Green is the pick, the Rockets are making somewhat of a ballsy bet on their player development and Green's work ethic. They're saying, we understand Green may not be well-rounded right now, but we believe he will iron out all these wrinkles in his game to the point where he is clearly going to be the second best player in the draft when we look back in 5 years. And listen, I think John Lucas is awesome at this player development stuff, and I thought it was pretty important that Steven Silas said yesterday that his whole coaching staff is going to return because these guys are going to have a lot of work ahead of them. When I watch Jalen Green, he feels like more of a project than a complete player at this point. Obviously, he's 19. I understand that. And while I do admire the kid's attitude, as you said, the intangibles are clearly there. The work ethic is clearly there. I still think it's kind of a ballsy play to select him at number 2 when there are 2 other prospects, I'll say, with higher floors, Yeah,
that's fair. I think the hard part with Green is that you haven't necessarily seen him in a structured basketball environment. And I think that's the one thing with the G League is that you were playing against older guys and you were playing against a lot of NBA players, but it's not, it's very fast paced. There's not a whole lot of defense that's played at all there. It's kind of an all-star game environment almost, it feels like. Whereas these college guys, you're seeing them it's very, the college game is very structured. It's very slow. You get coached up a lot, and the coaches basically control everything. Um, so you don't really have Green in that environment. But I do think that he played really well in the G League, and he probably did it against tougher competition. It was just a very different style of play.
Right. And I don't think that he had necessarily the best floor spacing with the Ignite team. Like I thought, there wasn't that much shooting around him. To be frank, I mean, if you're going to count Bobby Brown,
it's a bunch of 18-year-olds basically.
Yeah, I mean,
and a couple of vets.
Right, like it just wasn't the best environment for playmaking. Like it was a crowded lane oftentimes when he was going in. Here's a question: do we think Houston moves up or down?
If I had to bet, I think that they would probably move down before they move up. And I don't necessarily think that they'll do either. I think the chances are more likely than not that they just stay at 2. But I think that they would rather move down to accumulate maybe an extra asset if Cleveland wants to assure themselves of getting Mobley than they would of being able to trade up to get Cunningham.
I agree.
I also don't think that Detroit really wants to trade out of that pick either.
Right. I was just about to say, I don't think Detroit moves down because, the price of moving up is going to be pretty hefty, I think. They're going to want their own pick back. They're going to likely want future picks back from Houston. Likely at least one of 23 and 24 from this year's draft. It's going to be a little bit expensive.
Which I'm not doing. I don't really have any interest in giving that up to move up one spot, if we're being perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Would you? I looked at it this way. When Boston traded 1 to Philadelphia, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago in the Fultz draft, all they got back was an extra first-round pick, and that was moving from 1 to 3. So if I'm the Rockets, I'm not giving up more than an extra pick to move up from 1 to 3. And I know you look at it now and it's Fultz, but Fultz was right up there. Fultz was easily the number 1 prospect going into that draft. So
yeah, that was a consensus. I think people look back and try to make it seem like it wasn't a consensus. That was a consensus.
He was the consensus number 1 guy the entire year, and you basically have had that with Cunningham the entire year. But so why am I going to move up? Why am I going to give up a lot more than what Philly gave up to move up? To move up 1 spot where Philly gave up a lot, where Philly would have given up less to move up 1.
Well, I guess it really depends on how much better do you view Cunningham than all these other guys. Like, do you think Cunningham is this no-brainer, like superstar? Could potentially be an MVP candidate level guy in the future. If you do think that's the guy, well, then there's no price that's too much, right? Like, then there's never a price that's too much because you're always going to win the trade when you get a player like that. But if he's like, you're, a top 20 guy in the NBA, may not be a top 10 guy at any point, making all NBA teams, but you can get that guy with number 2 as well, then maybe not. Probably at that point, probably not.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I don't necessarily think Cunningham is quite that guy. I think he's really good, but I don't think that he's, a surefire Hall of Famer. I think that he's a multi-time All-Star and he does some things really well, but I don't have him. Like I said, I think if I had the number 1 pick, I would think about taking Mobley ahead of him.
Right. So I could totally, and you mentioned it really briefly, but I could totally see a scenario where they try and move down and trade with Cleveland, because it's clear to me that the Cavs want Evan Mobley, and if Houston truly wants Green, I think the Cavs will at least listen to offers so they can guarantee themselves Mobley. Now, it's questionable how much leverage they have now, given how much is leaked in the past week about them wanting Jalen Green, but it's an option to consider.
Well, maybe that's why you leak all that stuff. You kind of, this is lying season, as people say when it comes to the draft. So, maybe you try and give off the appearance that, with Cleveland that you're going to do one thing when you decide to do another. So it's really hard to say. But yeah, if they really like Green and they know Cleveland really likes Mobley, I mean, they can always tell the Cavs, hey, we might like Green more, but we're still going to take Mobley, and if we wind up keeping him, then we're going to be happy with him. So you could always have it where the Rockets take Mobley and the Cavs wind up taking Green, and maybe they flip them, later on that night. So there's a lot of different possibilities. But if you can pick up another asset, whether it be a first round pick, I don't think the Rockets would have interest in Colin Sexton, but maybe if Cleveland makes Darius Garland available to them in order for them to move up, who knows? I think that could be a direction that they go in.
I agree. And like I because the top of this draft is so awesome this year, I don't think there's going to be any depreciation from having the pick in hand, the player in hand, and then making a trade later on. Like I think
No,
it's going to be just as valuable.
especially if if the team that was right behind you really wants the guy that you wound up picking. So yeah, I agree.
The economy is made up of real people doing real stuff, and it affects everything. Which you obviously know since you're a real person doing real stuff. Marketplace is here to help you get smart about everything beyond the what of the day's business and economic news. We dig into the how and the why with the real people driving our economy. From big tech and interest rates to small businesses and what's happening at the Fed. Marketplace breaks it all down so you don't have to. Listen to Marketplace wherever you get your podcasts.
Where are you on 23 and 24 in this draft? Are there any particular players you're looking at and going, yeah, that's a player Houston would be really happy walking away with?
I don't have exact players, but I think that they will look to get guys who are versatile and can shoot. I think that was one thing just in talking to Steven Silas yesterday. I asked him what's kind of the one thing that you learned from watching the playoffs over the last couple of months, and he brought up versatility. And so I don't think that they are going to take guys who can't guard multiple positions. I don't think they're going to. I don't think that they won't. I don't think that they'll take guys who can't shoot. So, and you saw this last year when they started bringing in guys out of the G League and bringing in guys off the street. They were focused on guys who could shoot, and they were focused on guys who had a little bit of size. So I think that's the direction that they'll go in. I don't necessarily think that they'll use both picks. I could see them, taking one pick, or I could see them making one pick and then trading the other, maybe for something in the future. Maybe you package the two picks together and try and move up a handful of spots. I think that it's very difficult to go into training camp and into next season with 3 first-round picks on the roster. There's just not enough man hours to really develop those guys the way that I think that you would want.
It's also really tough to tell whether or not they'd be willing to move up if they don't know how the draft is going, right? Because if your guy is going to fall down, there's no reason to move up. But if on draft night, you get the sense that the guy is going to be a top, he's going to be a lottery pick, then there's a lot of incentive to try and move up.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that they'll have an idea about that going in. The other thing Rafael Stone said yesterday, he said a lot of things, but he said that he's making a lot more calls than he's getting. And he's talking to teams 2, 3, and 4, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and so you can guarantee that they have all those scenarios. They have all those scenarios planned out to where maybe if this guy's available, they call this team, and they maybe do 23 and 24 for 18, something like that if that were to come along. So I do think they're going to have all those scenarios played out. It does seem like they're going to be prepared for anything, whatever comes about on Thursday.
Yeah, and honestly, in this range, I think they should just select the youngest talented prospect they can find. I know that sounds obvious, but in this range, it's often popular to select older players, and I think this rebuild is going to take a little longer than most people expect. Like, I think you try to go as young as possible. A few guys I have listed: Kai Jones out of Texas, Zaire Williams out of Stanford, Jared Springer out of Tennessee, Trey Mann out of West Virginia, JT Thor out of Auburn. Like, those are really young guys, and I think they'll meld well with the long rebuild.
I don't think that I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't care how old the guy is, to be honest with you. And
Really?
I think that I like having. I don't mind at all having the older guys either, just because I do think that it adds a little bit of professionalism to your team. You're not having to babysit these guys quite as much. And I think the goal next year for them should be to be decent. I'm not saying that they should be focused on trying to make the playoffs next year, because I think that's a big jump. But I think the goal next year should be decent, and that they should be trying to get to that 35 win range, and maybe at least be in the conversation for the play-in tournament. I don't think that that's asking for too much. I don't think that they believe that they're that far away. The big thing with them is being able to keep guys on the floor. I'm going. Like I said, I don't think that they're necessarily going to use both of those picks, but I want somebody who's going to help me out, and I don't necessarily want somebody who I'm gonna have to hold his hand for 6 months.
And listen, I don't think Alperen Sengun or Jalen Johnson will fall this far, but if they do, I mean, you just have to select them without questions asked. Like, they're just two talented prospects. And, the opinions are wide ranging on those two, so that's why I listed them too. But, like, if they manage to fall to 23 and 24, which I don't think they will, but if they do, you just have to grab them, like, really quickly.
And guys always fall, that, for whatever reason, whether it's a medical thing or, an intangible thing, or it's a need thing for another team. There's always going to be those prospects who fall. I think, last year it was RJ Hampton, who I think fell really far in the first round. And there are going to be other guys that are like that as well. So I do think that you go in that spot, best guy available. If you decide to keep both picks, just take the best guys available. Doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter the position. Just go out and get your two guys and go into summer league, go into training camp, and then go into the season and try to win as many games as you can next year. And but like you said, there's gonna be some strain put on that player development staff for sure.
Yeah, this draft is going to tell us a lot about new GM Rafael Stone. Right? Do we still call him new GM, by the way? Like at what point do we remove the new GM tag?
I mean, I already did.
Okay, all right. So GM Rafael Stone.
This is his second draft. Remember, this is his second draft.
Sure.
So you can't say new GM when this is draft number 2.
Yeah. Okay. So this will tell us a lot about GM Rafael Stone and how he operates and how he thinks about players and player development and like how much they incorporate analytics into their decision making, all that kind of stuff. Like the draft is pretty informative with all that.
Yeah. You're going to just kind of see how they work as a front office. And I do think the one thing that we've learned, they're creative. They've done some creative things, both when it comes to trades. Going back to last year with the PJ Tucker trade, I thought that was a pretty creative trade the way that they did that. Same thing with the Oladipo trade. So they've shown some creativity. They've shown an ability to think outside the box. And so I'm curious to see how that how that gets magnified in this spot, because this is obviously it's important. This is an important stretch for them, and they don't necessarily, it's not make or break by any stretch, but they need to do well on Thursday, and they need to come out of this with, at least one foundational piece and maybe a couple guys who are going to be on the team for a while.
Yeah, and if there's anything we've learned so far, it's that they're crazy aggressive, right? Like the amount of rumors that that have come out about them being aggressive and trying to move up for number 1, it tells you that kind of mentality has shifted over from the Daryl Morey era, carried over rather, and they're still going to continue being like a high phone call team.
Yeah, and that's the one thing another thing that Rafael Stone said yesterday is that they're not going to leave any stone unturned, and he did the no pun intended too. After that, they're going to make every call. They're going to travel down every.
Wait. He said no stone unturned.
Yeah, and then he said no pun intended.
At some point, like I feel like someone with that name would get tired of it, right? Like of that pun.
I this is the first time I've heard him use it, so
yeah. Okay. I mean, listen, if you're comfortable with it, like it's a great pun. It's sitting there for you at all times. It's just.
Well, we'll have to keep track of how many times we hear it over the next however many years. But I believe that's the first time I've heard him use it, at least with us publicly. So, maybe that's something that he likes to say privately, but that's the first time I've heard it used publicly.
1 for 1. Let's see if he does it again next year. Thank you so much for coming on, Adam. Where can we find your work in social media?
sportsradio610.com, Twitter at Adam Spillane, and then Sports Radio 610 on draft night. We're going to have a draft special with me and Sean Pendergast, so be sure to tune in for that.
Awesome. I'll talk to you down the line, man.
All right. Take it easy.
On July 23, 1993, basketball superstar Michael Jordan's father, James Jordan, was murdered in North Carolina.
This is the father of the most famous athlete on the planet, and on his 57th birthday, he was an unidentified dead man in the middle of nowhere.
From WRAL Studios, available now is Follow the Truth, where we dig into the story of the James Jordan murder and the man who says he didn't do it.
I know that if this was not Michael Jordan's father, I wouldn't be in prison.
We'll question the evidence.
Is it possible for a man to be shot in his car and authorities not find any blood?
Our ballistics expert says it couldn't have happened.
Shed light on the mystery that has always surrounded the murder.
Whether his financial dealings could have had anything to do with his death.
And uncover bombshell new developments.
Here we are a quarter century later, and the back cover on this whole murder case isn't yet closed.
Follow the Truth on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen.